Good afternoon, and welcome to the Black Metropolis Research Consortium's Fellowship Presentation Series. Many of you are familiar with the fellowship program that we offer. It's a summer short-term fellowship, and this past summer, well, let me say that in 2020, seven fellows were selected from a very competitive sort of application process. And because of the pandemic, they were not able to come to Chicago, access the repositories that they had pinpointed for their research. And so in 2021, this past summer, they finally were able to get here and to proceed with their research. And so today, we do have two of the seven presenting. And as you know, we have a series. So we have two upcoming dates. And I'm just going to quickly remind you of those. The next date coming up is September 29th. And then 2 weeks after that, October 13th. All right, so that's just a quick reminder. First, I don't want to waste too much time, but first we will hear from Dr. Jakobi Williams, and he's an associate professor at Indiana University-Bloomington. I'll give you a bio in just a moment. His talk is Neighborhoods First, the Black Panther Party's Impact on Grassroots Community Organizations. And we will also hear from Grace D. Gipson. She's an assistant professor at Virginia Commonwealth University. And her talk is entitled Telling Her Story and Continuing a Legacy, Chicago's Black Girl Magic in Comics. All right, so Professor Williams, if you are ready, I am going to stop sharing my screen. Well, I'll give the introduction and then I'll go forward. So Dr. Jakobi Williams is the Ruth Ann Halls Associate Professor at Indiana University-Bloomington. He is chair of the Department of African American and African Diaspora Studies and holds a joint appointment in the Department of History. He is a civil rights, Black Power, social justice, and African American history scholar. He has provided hundreds of invited lectures domestically and abroad on the subjects of civil rights and social justice movements. Dr. Williams has served as a consultant regarding civil rights issues and history for the Andrew Mellon Foundation, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the National Civil Rights Museum, the Social Justice Initiative at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and the Cairo Center for Religion, Rights, and Social Justice, which helped to found the New Poor People's Campaign, led by Reverend Barber. His most recent book, From the Bullet to the Ballot, the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party and Racial Coalition Politics in Chicago, was published by the University of North Carolina Press under the prestigious John Hope Franklin series. And the book was the foundation for the script to the Warner Brothers film, Judas and the Black Messiah. He has had other peer-reviewed publications appear in the Journal of Civil Rights and Human Rights, Black Perspectives, Black Women, Gender and Families, Journal of Pan-African Studies, University of Georgia Press, the University of Wisconsin Press, and the New Press. His work can also be found in Jacobin magazine, Mother Jones, Gawker, Vox, and Indianapolis Star, and dozens of media programs in radio, television, newspaper, and podcast formats. Dr. Williams' most recent awards include, of course, the Black Metropolis Research Consortium Fellowship, a National Endowment for the Humanities Grant, National Humanities Center Fellowship, and the Big Ten Academic Alliance Academic Leadership Program Award. Dr. Williams is currently completing 2 books, Neighborhoods First and Global Call of Power to the People. Both books examine the monumental impact of the Black Panther Party on non-African American groups, both domestically and abroad, as a model for grassroots community organizing to address disparities and disadvantages. Neighborhood First examines organizations in Chicago that established the multiracial or original Rainbow Coalition in 1968. Global Call of People to the of Power to the People is a study of groups in Great Britain, New Zealand, Australia, Israel, Palestine, Italy, and India that did not have any direct contact with the Black Panther Party, but chose to create movements in their countries modeled after the Panthers' grassroots community organizing and racial coalition strategies. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Dr. Williams may begin. And before he begins, will all of you please mute yourselves? Check your mute button, please. Thank you.
All righty. Can you all hear me okay? I hope so.
Yes.
That's great. So I'll start here. Let me start my timer because I get a little bit long-winded and want to make sure that I leave time for my colleague and fellow recipient of this particular grant. The title is obviously at the top here, Neighborhoods First. Much of what I wanted to introduce you to has already been indicated in the bio, so I skipped some of it. But I'm actually writing four projects, working on four projects at once. And that does not include the digital humanities projects that I plan to incorporate as well in terms of archives and other digital humanities methods. So this particular book has evolved and changed over time in numerous ways. So I'll introduce you to what I was able to uncover this summer, thankfully, through the BMRC meta-funded grant. And so here I start with this photo, which is an attention getter. I've used it before. You have a member of the party with his leather jacket and his beret, which is unapologetically Black power symbol, standing next to what they will argue, the Panthers will argue, they're brothers of the struggle, the group of young patriots, what's white, predominantly white Appalachian community from the South who have migrated north. And I'll talk a bit about that migration history in a second, and wearing that racist Confederate flag symbol. And together they're able to transcend those stark polar opposite political differences to join forces under the roof of class solidarity. And so what I'm writing is a continuation of using this group as a springboard to write about various other groups. There's about 87 groups in the nation who emulate the Panthers, but most of the robust political work comes out of Chicago. And I am biased to my hometown, just to be quite honest about it. So I start here in this particular book that was introduced in the introduction by Allison Sutton. In this book, I trace, or I should say I highlight, not trace. In chapter 4 of the book, I only highlight this organization, the Rainbow Coalition. Typically, when we think of the Rainbow Coalition, folks, I immediately think of Jesse Jackson, who had no connection to this group. He appropriates the title in the 1980s and runs for president twice in the 80s. But the original founders are these young community organizers in Chicago who are organizing against the daily Democratic machine. And Chicago then, and still is today, especially when the census record has come out, and it gets worse with each census record, it's the most racially, residentially segregated city in America. And so those groups are dealing with their neighborhoods. So the title Neighborhoods First is a campaign slogan from Harold Washington, who becomes the first African-American mayor of Chicago. So those of you who may be unfamiliar with Chicago, Chicago is a city of neighborhoods. We love our city, but really only give two craps about our neighborhoods. And so Harold Washington understood that. And so he used that slogan, Neighborhoods First, to demonstrate the ways in which as mayor, he'll put neighborhoods first before the city. And so he used the Rainbow Coalition and all those various groups who were organizing in their neighborhoods and their communities on behalf of those particular political entities that were affected by the daily democratic machine as a way of springboarding himself into office. And so I thought that was a great title. It should be in quotation marks, that title, if I go back, Neighborhoods First, should be in quotation marks, but that was his campaign slogan. It's a very effective political tool. So in chapter 4, this book only highlight them. What I intend to do with my new project, which again began as one book, the ways in which the Panthers were able to influence and impact community organizing groups domestically and abroad. So the first half would have been just these domestic groups, and the second half would have been the transnational impact. But I just got too much information. So that those books have evolved from one book to 4. So I give you some information, and thanks to the BMRC, it may be evolved to 5. I hope not. I need to just get one of them done, just to be quite honest about it. So before I start, let me give you some context for my project. So these particular films, the Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution, by Stanley Nelson, all of these particular groups, these particular films have used my work, my research, my book in some capacity. So I want to say a little bit about them before I move forward. So there's about a 22-minute section of a 2-hour documentary by Stanley Nelson on the Panthers, where the entire section is on Chicago, on the Rainbow Coalition, on Fred Hampton, on the activist work that's going on there. And that's all my work, all my photos, my films, other documents, the narrative and so forth. But I don't appear in the documentary, and I could talk about why for political reasons. I didn't want my face in, that's another conversation. The first Rainbow Coalition was released by a filmmaker by the name of Ray Sastaban about 2 years ago. And it is, and quite honestly, the visual version of the book. So if you read my book from introduction to the conclusion, from the story and the migration history and of Black Chicago to the connection to Obama in chapter 6, you can, the entire arc is in that documentary. And again, I don't appear in that one as well, even though I do have a good relationship with Ray Sastaban. Well, that's another conversation for why I don't appear in there as well, for political reasons. And as an activist scholar, the last one is this Warner Brothers film. Most recently, even though it's won Oscars and Emmys, Shaka King, the director, used my book as the script, to write the script, as the most useful source for the script. But I do not in any way, shape, or form endorse this film as a biopic of Fred Hampton. So I've gone back and forth with executives of Warner Brothers over certain issues, but I digress. I leave those for those who are interested about having that discussion, question, answer. I will encourage those in the room who actually want a history and a biography of Fred Hampton to go see The Murder of Fred Hampton. But this film does not do that. This is a biopic of the infiltrator, William O'Neill, but it's not a biopic of Fred Hampton. So I do not endorse it as such. And so my name would not appear in those credits for those political reasons too. So I've consciously made those decisions on my own. So I just want to at least advertise that. So I can't move forward without talking about the Rainbow Coalition, not introducing Bob Lee. Fred Hampton rightfully gets most of the credit, as I've gotten emails and correspondence from folks about today's discussion of wanting more information about Fred Hampton, which you would get, but I'd be remiss if I did not include Bob Lee, who is the real mover and shaker, the critical creator and thinker and originator of this concept of the Rainbow Coalition and bringing these people into the fold. So Fred Hampton becomes the face of the organization, the de facto leader, but it's Bob Lee, whose name is actually Robert E. Lee III, as he's migrant from Galveston, Texas, is the real mover and thinker of this organization. But Fred Hampton equally gets the credit as well. So who are this Rainbow Coalition? Let me move a little fast. I only got about a dozen minutes left. So the original organizations, of course, are the Panthers themselves, Illinois chapter of the party, led by Bob Lee and Fred Hampton. Bob Lee brings those Appalachian white migrants from, as Chicago is very much, this neighborhood's first concept is very much a migration story as well. So Bob Lee migrates from Galveston, Texas, Houston, Texas. Fred Hampton, his family are from Haynesville, Louisiana. He's born in Chicago, but his people from Louisiana. So it's also a migration story. The Young Patriots are all up and down the foothills and mountains of Appalachia, from as far south as Alabama to as far north as West Virginia, Kentucky, who moved to Chicago, all look for economic opportunities. So that's also a migration story. The Young Lords as well, another migration story, looking to Chicago for economic opportunities. They're coming from obviously the island of Puerto Rico, because they're Puerto Ricans, but also along the East Coast, particularly New York and some other places, migrating to Chicago. And those three groups make up the original Rainbow Coalition. Rise of Angry is listed, but they're not one of the original founders. They get involved much later as the Democratic National Convention is in Chicago, and those groups, those student groups and anti-war movement activists and protesters come to Chicago, end up staying. And they found this group Rise of Angry, but they work in coalition, but they're not one of the original founders. So it is Bob Lee who brings in the Patriots, and it is Fred Hampton who brings in the Young Lords. And those three groups are the original Rainbow Coalition. Again, no Jesse Jackson. So what's the intent of my project? How did I use these archives? What did I do during my 6.5, 7 weeks in Chicago with the help of a doctoral candidate in our department, Brandon Stokes? Shout out to Brandon. He was very instrumental in to this project and to these, again, sources for these archives from archives as well. So I began my study at the Vivian G. Harsh. My initial reason for joining and wanting this grant was to put my nose in those Illinois Black Party, the History Project papers, which were unavailable, and the Tamil Black papers, both at the Vivian G. Harsh Archive. It's on 95th and Halston on the South Side. As a son of Chicago, born and raised, Inglewood, people don't like to come to the South Side to do scholarship and research. Man, that's a repository that you must visit, especially the Tamil Black papers. You cannot, in my opinion, write anything on Black Chicago without using Tamil Black papers. You're discrediting your own scholarly contributions if you attempt to do so. And so those papers are there at the Vivian G. Harsh collection, the Carter G. Woodson Library on the South Side. So unfortunately, I was not able to stick my nose in those Black Panther Party Project papers. As a sidebar, I helped to start that archive along with the Illinois chapter members themselves in the early 2000s, with Panther members like Billy Dunbar. For those who are interested, he owns a small business, copycat Xeroxing company on 79th and Halsted. In the back of that business is where the archive began. So every time I'm able to get documents or there's some speaking engagements, he's there recording, he's interviewing folks visual representations along with audio. Anytime we share information or documents, I make sure he digitizes this material. But there's a contingent of party members who just would not share their information with anyone, me or anyone. And so my understanding from the group that some of those folks had deposited their material into this archive. So I was very eager to put my nose in there because I've been for years wanting to get my hands on some material, and they just wouldn't share it with me or others. But due to COVID and some other factors, we were not able to deposit the materials. So I was not able to use them. So I had to turn my attention to other areas, which the Tamil Black papers were sufficiently engrossing to help me reach some of my research agenda. However, the Illinois Writers Project and Holmgren Papers, Horace Caton Files, those are they have some linkages there as well. Just again, shout out to Brandon, digging his nose in those areas. I also want to put my nose in the DeSable Museum. They have a number of papers there, but DeSable hasn't been open since COVID. So I was not able to put my nose in those Lucy Montgomery papers. For those unfamiliar, Lucy Montgomery is one of these rich, white female philanthropists who used her money as a form of activism. She was one of the chief financiers of the Black Panther Party, Rainbow Coalition, others. So I wanted to see what's in her papers, but I wasn't able to get my nose in there. So I spent probably most of my time outside of Vivian Harsh at DePaul, which I'll talk about in a second with the Young Lords Archive. And then obviously I used the Red Squad files, but also the Chicago Authority papers there, and hell, Washington papers are equally important. So again, shout out to Brandon and others, because there's too much to do and no time. So Brandon was able to knock out a lot of this work, which also will better benefit his dissertation too. We don't have an issue, Brandon. So the significance of these works, so very, very quickly, because I got about 8 minutes, so let me speed up a bit and talk about what's there. I can't move forward without talking about the librarians or giving a shout out to librarians and archivists. So at the Harsh collection, Beth and Cynthia were key contributors, pointing me into various boxes. All the COVID protocols are supposed to make these things difficult. They made the process seamless. So I got to give a good shout out to them. At DePaul, words, I don't have enough words to thank Morgan and Derek. Man, all I can say is I have all kind of golden nuggets that none of which I'm gonna share with y'all today because I'm needed for my own research. You can see it when I write it, and you can dig your nose in there. But the ways in which I approach that particular archive, I want to look at one thing: the Young Lords Archive. And Morgan and Derek introduced me to a whole treasure trove of papers and resources and repositories and alternative presses and ephemera and things that I had was not privileged to. And as a scholar, I made sure that I spent at least 6 days scavenging all the historical journals, recent journal articles, and books to see if anyone else has used the material, and they haven't. So I got a gold mine. Much of which, again, I'm not going to share with you today. I'm keeping it to myself. But I'm still working with Morgan and Derek. I don't have hugs and kisses to you both. I still don't have enough words to say thank you. We have an ongoing relationship as the ways in which they have helped professors and students use this material at DePaul for teaching resources, has expanded my horizon and how with my own digital humanities projects can use this material in numerous ways as well. So we're going to have an ongoing working relationship for years to come. So I'd be remiss to say to move forward without shouting those two individuals out. In fact, I might not be able to, I got so much material, I might need his own, Young Lords might need his own book in Chicago. So I got to figure that part out. And of course, the Chicago History Museum. So I'm running out of time. So let me at least go through some of this material. And again, thank you to the archivist. So let me start here with the Tamil Black papers to give you some examples as quickly as possible. So I don't want to bore you to death. So again, Chicago city neighborhoods. All these neighborhoods have neighborhood associations and various papers. They have weeklies and newspapers and periodicals, some of which are paid, some of which are free. If you don't live in those neighborhoods, most likely you won't pay attention to these things. Well, Indigo happens to be one of these papers. They've been around for almost 50 years. It's still it's part of various neighborhood staples in the African American community. So as a scholar, I know what happened in the 2337 West Monroe apartment that led to the assassination of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. What we as scholars don't know, which is not in the legal record, it is not in the 13 years subsequent trial that led up to the Supreme Court. What happened outside? What happened in the community? What happened on the street? So the misconception is there's a 14-man raiding party that leads to the assassination and death of Mark Clark and Fred Hampton. Now, I've gathered various anecdotal information over the years, but never much in print. So I have a series of various, thanks to Tamil Black papers, of articles and representations and primary sources in print that document what took place outside. So very quickly, I blew this one article up in the Indigo to give you the perspective of a 16-year-old Black female who lived next door, who was getting up to go to work at the post office to make some extra money for the holidays. And she witnessed what was taking place outside prior to the raid, and the police even raided her apartment, held her family at gunpoint, abused her parents in some particular ways, fired shots in their home. And what she described is like an army outside. And Chicago in December in the winters, we have really deep snow that night as well. And so there were some cars parked outside their house and Fred Hampton's of those folks' apartment that hadn't been moved. But according to her and other accounts that I have, the police had cleared the street, barricaded the place, had paddy wagons there, had snipers across the street in other people's apartment. None of that is in the record. And so these papers give these accounts from the residents in the community and their experiences with repression and police brutality during that night of the raid, as well as their apartments were used for staging and even had their doors kicked in the middle of the night as well, as the police are trying to secure the scene so they can carry out this raid. So this is another golden nugget of mine that I can use in the next in the material that I have. Very quickly, outside of this is from DePaul, outside of the Young Lords archive, there's all these various associations. So I'm from Inglewood, Southside Chicago. Again, Chicago city neighborhoods, most racially segregated city in America. From Inglewood, we hear Lincoln Park, and all we think is, oh yeah, those old rich, racist, privileged white folks. We don't want to do with those folks up there. But you get up there and dig through these association papers, and I won't list them all because there's just too many, of community resources there available at DePaul from these various communities. There's a whole nuanced, robust movement taking place in Lincoln Park. So the Young Lords are fighting against these housing issues in Lincoln Park, urban renewal and gentrification. And then they're not alone. I mean, this includes the Catholic Church, various gangs, community organizations, the Young Lords themselves, the coalition of the Rainbow Coalition, the Panthers. You get all these various nexuses of strands of activism taking place within Lincoln Park, which I just didn't know was such a hotbed of during this period of movement. Policy coming out the daily machine from City Hall, from federal legislation, and the movement of communities, various communities individually are fighting against it in all these various ways. So this is just some infomercial to demonstrate the ways in which and the Lincoln Park Community Association papers, they have supporting of the Panthers, and some of these groups have all this material that I hadn't found anywhere else, not even the Tamil Black papers and others. So all these very repositories have all this information that's useful. Very quickly, again, neighborhood papers. If most of this would not appear in the Chicago Tribune or the Sun-Times, but here in the Learner newspaper, that's part and parcel to Lincoln Park, they are documenting their particular candidates, who's running for office. Cha-Cha Hemmer's Young Lords. There's a whole host of material in these archives about his aldermanic campaign and others in that community that opens up the Latino community to this day as the real viable voting bloc in the city of Chicago, that he's the first to run for office in the city as a Latino and create this kind of real political power nexus. This irony is coming out of Lincoln Park, and then these folks get, due to urban renewal and gentrification, be forced removed to every part of the city. But without this Latino community, there is no Harold Washington. Without these kinds of activism that's taking place in Lincoln Park, there is no Harold Washington. So this Young Lords archive, and I'm sorry, these various papers available at the DePaul Special Collection Archives, thanks to Morgan and Derek, are invaluable. And I end here very quickly because I know I'm out of time. There's too many other newspapers, neighborhood association papers, and things of that nature that have all this these primary source nuggets that I found. But I'm also intrigued, as you can see from my screenshot, with visual cultural material. And so, look, I know this is the counterculture period in the late 60s, 70s. I don't know what kind of psychedelic drugs these folks were on, but man, some of the images on the cover, some of these papers are just too important and nuanced and intriguing. I don't have time to share some of those crazy folks' pictures with you, but this is one of the drawings. As I'm always looking for book cover material that I don't necessarily have to use pictures, right? I can use visual cultural representation. So Second City is one of those, again, alternative press, important papers that I was not privy to until Morgan and Derek introduced them to me, along with The Seed in Chicago, which again have some of these eclectic images and others and articles and material that's taking place there. And so you have all this ephemeral culture and primary source periodicals that are available there as well. That's equally important. So I don't want to leave without saying something about that. And then here, this photo is from Chicago History Museum. This is in the Red Squad files. And I only use this one because it doesn't matter where I stuck my nose, Harold Washington papers to the Chicago History Museum, Tamil Black, wherever, that this photo kept appearing because it was discovered, it was in 1981 in the subsequent court trials revolving around the assassination of Mark Clark and Fred Hampton. And so here in this photo, it appears in all the mainstream press, alternative presses, flyers, ephemeral posters. And so I figured I'd use that as another equally important primary source for the Chicago History Museum. Here in the bottom left, if I'm assuming mirroring what I have, you can see the intention of the police that Fred Hampton's assassinated, and they argue that he's now being rehabilitated, demonstrating their particular purpose of the raid that night and so forth. And then I in here just to advertise to those who may not know what these folks look like today. Every, I think 4 or 5 years, I try to have the coalition here to IU on campus. This is maybe from 2016 or 17. And so you can get an idea of what these folks look like. I'm hoping to have them back. Usually there's some heightened polarization taking place in our current political climate. Today is no different. And so here we are, is another opportunity to maybe invite them to campus to talk about some issues and the work that they did to transcend those differences so students could get access to them. But also there is no retirement for revolutionaries. So this also gives me opportunity to pay them, to help them in their elderly years as they are suffering various ailments and health conditions. So on the very right is High Thurman, the Young Patriots. Here's Cha-Cha Jimenez and Young Lords. Lynn Fritz and Poison are both members of the Illinois chapter of the party. You know, this old handsome young man just happy to be in a picture with him. But this is some of the activists of the period who are now established what they call the Rainbow Coalition of the Elders. And they're working in coalition with people like the Poor People's Campaign, Black Lives Matter, is advising some of these groups because they tend, no offense to young folks, you guys think that you just invented the wheel and with the methods used for activism. Folks, as a historian, these actually don't read anything. And so as scholars, we advise them, but also these groups, these elders are advising activists as well, so they don't make the same mistakes that they do. So I end there, and I'm sorry that I went over about 2 or 3 minutes.
Allison, I think you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Thank you. So we will hold our questions until the end of Grace Gipson's talk, which is next. I'm going to take a moment now to introduce Dr. Grace D. Gipson. But thank you so much, Jakobi Williams. That was awesome. And I'm sure you guys have questions, but just hold on to those for just a little bit. All right. So okay, so Dr. Grace Gipson, excuse me, sorry about that. Dr. Grace Gipson is an assistant professor in the Department of African American Studies at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. As a Black future feminist pop culture scholar, Dr. Gipson's area of research interest centers on Black popular culture, digital humanities, representations of race and gender within comic books, Afrofuturism, and race and new media. Dr. Gipson's work has been featured in various publications and book chapters through such outlets as Huffington Post, Chicago Humanities Festival, NPR, and Black Perspectives. Her current book project seeks to explore Black female identities as personified in comics and fandom culture. Outside of the classroom, you can find Dr. Gipson collecting comic books and stamps on her international travel discoveries, ticket stubs to the latest movies, co-hosting the video podcast Conversations with Beloved and Kindred, participating as part of the hashtag Black Comics Chat podcast crew, and giving back to the community through a myriad of projects. Dr. Gipson, if you are ready, you may share your screen.
All right, let me go ahead and do that here. Okay. Okay. Excellent. So it's actually interesting that Dr. Williams showed the images of, I'm assuming kind of like magazine covers and so forth, and the various visual culture images that he had, because it kind of helps to segue into much of what the research that I was doing in Chicago for this summer. So, you know, in a way, I give you an indirect thank you for that, to kind of usher us into this discussion. I also want to say, so I'm not from Chicago, but I am a fellow Illinois. I was raised and went to school in Champaign, Illinois, but I frequented to Chicago quite often. It was pretty much a summer routine, whether it was going to the Taste of Chicago, whether it was going to the DuSable Museum, Shedd Aquarium, various things. So being able to go back to Chicago in the space of not necessarily entertaining or fun, but to research, although it was still fun as well too, you know, years later, was something I really appreciated being able to have the opportunity to do, and go back and have the opportunity from BMRC to take that, to do the fellowship and do the work that I needed to do. So my summer plan or agenda, so my proposed research sites was primarily the DuSable Museum of African American History. My current book project is looking at Black female identities that are personified in comics and in fandom culture. So I'm looking at Black female characters in comics and graphic novels, as well as the artists and creators of many of these characters. And so I can't talk about cartoons and comics and Black women without talking about Jackie Orms. I mean, she is essentially the beginning. She is kind of lays the foundation and groundwork for Black women cartoonists and Black women in comics. So you can't have that conversation or that dialogue without talking about Jackie Orms. And so my primarily, purpose was to get access to her papers at the DuSable Museum. And also just in general, the Chicago Public Library system, as there are various sections that are beginning to focus on graphic novels and comic books. Many of the libraries also have comic book clubs, whether it's for adults or for kids. So I wanted to be able to kind of take part and witness and, kind of be in the backseat and nerd out, I guess one could say, with some fellow Chicago or some folks from Chicago, I say fellow Illinoisans, looking at comics. And so what would end up happening is that unfortunately, the DuSable Museum, due to COVID, and Dr. Williams speaks to this as well, I was not able to get access to those papers. And so with the Chicago Public Library system, I was able to go to various sites and get good information, good knowledge from local residents about, how they use comics, how it has changed their, life, or, in ways in which it is offering an opportunity to learn from them. But needless to say, although I was not able to access the DuSable Museum, there were 3 exhibits that I did not know about until actually probably 2 weeks before getting to Chicago, that actually worked out and played a huge role in the work, and actually offered some introductory research to what I would be needing later on. And that would be the Chicago and Comics, Where Comics Came to Life, 1880 to 1960 exhibit at the Chicago Culture Center. Chicago Comics, 1960s to now at the Museum of Contemporary Art. And the Marvel Universe of Superheroes exhibit at the Museum of Science and Industry. I also added the Visa Butler portraits. Although it is not connected to comics, the fact that it is a Black woman created it, I felt it necessary to make sure to acknowledge it and speak to the culture of what Black women in comics and cartoons and visual culture are doing. And this was at the Art Institute of Chicago. So for me, that was just an extra bonus to be able to see that and participate in that. So first was the Chicago and Comics, Where Comics Came to Life, 1880-1960 exhibit. And so here, this was the first thing that I would dive into while being in Chicago. And it was, it kind of gives the groundwork of comics in Chicago. And so what many people don't realize is that, yes, New York, yes, Los Angeles have a comic book scene, but Chicago was just as prevalent as it relates to comic books and cartooning, and often does not get the recognition of that. And so if it is being recognized, it's, kind of under pseudonyms or under, different names like Metropolis or so forth. Or you can definitely see if you watch any Batman or Dark Knight movie, Chicago is a huge setting and the groundwork and foundation of where that takes place there. So it was important for me to be able to go to this exhibit to see first the significance of Chicago and the comic book landscape. And so with here, it offered an opportunity for me to see how the Chicago Defender, which is a big proponent into how Black cartoonists are able to enter into the landscape of comics and cartooning. And so this was the first place where many artists definitely Jackie Orms, are able to have their work presented, have their work seen. This would be one of the many places, because as a Black female cartoonist, that could not really be her sole job. So she had to publish in various spaces. And so the Chicago Defender offers that opportunity to make sure the work gets presented, and it's very popular, and at the time it still is in existence today. And so being able to go to the Culture Center, even though I didn't get access to the Jackie Orms paper, much of her work is presented at this exhibit. And I actually got to see a live and an Olympic color Patty Joe doll, which is here in the corner, which they really can't find too many of those. And so in my just, searching and in my fascination of Jackie Orms, I had always seen images, but to actually see the doll in person, as someone who does collect dolls, I was like, oh, this was like a dream come true, to be able to see it and lay my eyes on it. I couldn't touch it, but to be that close, that was good enough for me. And so, and then also here in the corner, you have an image of a Black cartoonist named Vera Hendrix, who was being showcased in one of the local newspapers in Chicago. So we're talking about the 40s and 50s at this time, even 30s, with Orms coming in at that time. Black women have a presence. They are, presenting their work. They're humanizing the story of Black subjects, particularly Black women, when at a time cartoons and Black folks were equated to caricatures or stereotypes. So to be able to see particularly Black women in this field, finding their voice, also producing these images was very much, new. It was very much not heard of. So as someone who, I'm not an artist, but as someone who admires it and is very much a comic book collector, I was happy to see myself in there. Because as a kid, when I first started reading comics, I used to ask my grandmother who would get them for me. I don't see people that look like me. And so to know that during this time that they were existing, but kind of being pushed to the side or hidden, lets me know that, okay, so we do exist. When we were here, and it wasn't until the 1970s, we were actually, much more present, and Chicago plays a huge role in that. And so next was the Chicago Comics 1960s to now at the Museum of Contemporary Art. So this is where, if I had to compare the two exhibits, this is where you see much more Black folks present at this exhibit versus the one at the Chicago Culture Center. There is much more an intentional emphasis to make sure that Black cartoonists are being showcased and being centered in the discussion. And so, and also the 1960s is where you do see much more, many more artists coming into the fold, and their work being presented, and not necessarily in the mainstream, but the independent realm is where you see a lot of this work. And so Bianca Eunice, which her image is right here in the center, I actually had the opportunity to meet her and be on a panel with her for the Terra Foundation. And she's a young Black cartoonist from Chicago who is continuing in the legacy of someone like a Jackie Orms, of someone like Eve Ewing, who is doing the work of making sure that not only are Black women present in this field that has been often dominated by white men, but also that we're seeing Black females also in the storyline. So it's not just them simply as the artists themselves, but actually presenting the characters as well. And so she provides that continuing legacy that I speak of, or that's noticed in the title, and is able to kind of give that present day look. And so there's also several other artists that are featured, but my main focus here was looking at Bianca's work, and also an artist by the name of Yeunde Olu, who also has work presented here at the MCA, which you can see her work here on my right, your left there. And so a last exhibit was the Marvel Universe of Superheroes exhibit. So this is where I like to say this is the mainstream part of my work. The first two exhibits are definitely more so geared towards the independent and alternative comics perspective of Black women being featured. And here with this exhibit, it is more of the mainstream. So you're obviously able to see, you know, Black Panther, and you're able to see the women of Wakanda being presented, and not necessarily just T'Challa. And so this was, you know, in a way an extra bonus, but also a way to tie in that we still need to have the conversation, even if it is on the mainstream level, which is even more prevalent. I would argue that independent does a much better job of highlighting and centering Black female voices, whether it be the characters or the creators, than does the mainstream. They are, I would say, you know, behind in it, but definitely slowly, you know, catching up and getting on board. So going to the museum, I remember as a kid going to the Museum of Science and Industry, and was more so focused on the science part. So to see this Marvel exhibit, I was like, oh, okay, so we're changing up the landscape here. It is, like I said, it is in the mainstream format, but the fact that it is there, I appreciated having the opportunity to kind of revisit it as an adult, and going to see what they had to offer. And like I said, it's the Marvel, so it's everybody that's there. But obviously, my focus is on Wakanda, particularly the women of Wakanda there. And so a huge, you know, the significance and impact. And so as mentioned, although I was not able to get access to the Orange paper, my plan is to return back later this year to go to the Diaspora to access that, because Jackie's papers, Orange papers, are a huge part of the chapter in which I'm looking at on Black creatives. And so like I said, you can't talk about Black female creators without talking about Jackie Orange. So there will be a return visit back to Chicago. But as mentioned, I was able to get some other goodies and some other nuggets that were able to make sure I could use the fellowship in the way that it was intended. So May came in with one, but I came out with many more, and was able to also make several connections and network about the significance of Black comics in the press and in publishing, because there is this cartooning is not necessarily something that we maybe see in the archive. It is important to, you know, create a space for it, and particularly Black female representation in that. Also, the fact that many of these comics, their start was in Black presses, such as, and I have here, Black World, where they actually did a feature on a cartoon festival of Black cartoonists. And so, which was originally titled The Negro Digest and would later be known as Black World. And so you're seeing that Black cartoonists, and particularly Black women, had a presence. And like I said, it's not as though they just appeared in the 1970s. They were very much there. It wasn't many, but they did, they were doing the work. Also, I say, you know, the significance of this project is making sure that Chicago as a city is seen as an important city and a character in many ways within the comic book arena. I said Chicago is a setting that is used a lot and frequently, but doesn't get the pub, it doesn't get the notoriety that it deserves. And so also finding a space and place for Black female creators and characters, because there is a large surplus, particularly of independent indie creators. It's important to showcase their work, and a lot of that I was able to see going to the Chicago Public Library, their exhibits or their workshops that they put on. Also, you know, centering Black female voices. You know, Black women are, you know, creating this demand for diversity. So in addition to someone like Jackie Orms and Bianca Eunice, you have Eve Ewing, Ashley A. Woods, and Spike Troutman, who are all Chicago natives and all Black female cartoonists in that are very much take pride in their city, and it is reflected in their work. Even particularly with Eve Ewing, who takes on the Ironheart series, we get an opportunity to see a Black teen girl in comics in the city of Chicago. And it's a real life story. So we can feel as though it's not just something that is made up or created, but actually someone who's from Chicago is actually telling the story. And so like I said, we're building off this established legacy. And so there is no time, it is by no means lingering off the work of Black cartoonists and Black comic book artists and Black characters. If anything, it is continuing to pick up speed. And so I say, my return back, I look forward to that, to gather more. Also, I'm working with the Terra Foundation to, is looking as far as for additional grants to do more work on Jackie Orms and with the Chicago Humanities Festival. So it was really exciting to be able to, start in with one thing, but gain new insight and new organizations and new opportunities that I may not have even had thought about. And so I definitely want to shout out Allison Cuddy and Jakobi, Dave Simone Montgomery, who are with the Chicago Humanities Festival, who also gave me an opportunity to present, some of my early work that I did this summer with them, and also setting up the interview with Bianca Eunice. And so I said, I look forward to my return back to Chicago to dive into the Orms papers and to just kind of relive a little bit of my childhood at the New South Museum. And I'm hopefully trying to get back before winter because as someone who is from Illinois, those winters are treacherous and I don't miss them. But yes, it would be good to I look forward to my return back to Chicago. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gipson. That was great. We do have a few minutes for questions, and I'm sure we have some for our speakers. I'm going to switch this over to gallery mode. And yeah, if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourselves.
Okay, so I have one.
Phoebe?
Thank you both for your talks and this amazing research. I was wondering, a question for Grace. It seems that graphic novels have become more and more popular. I know, like The March, John Lewis, and that story, I've read that to my son. And I'm wondering if there are more opportunities for cartoonist with something like that going on and specifically for Black cartoonists, but also in Chicago, where's the place for sort of training in cartoon work?
So a lot of cartoonists that I've spoken with were, not trained professionally or traditionally. It was more so, this was, a hobby that kind of became this, professional career for them. I do know that many people do go to the Art Institute of Chicago. That becomes a very commonplace for that. Interesting enough, many community centers within Chicago and the public library system also have workshops, talking about how to build a graphic novel. You're building panels for a comic strip, because sometimes it's as basic as putting that together. And the libraries become great spaces for that because they're not as intimidating as maybe going to an institution where you may feel like, oh, do I fit in or can I get accepted? So I would say first starting with, the local libraries and community centers with that, because it's in many cases, sometimes it's also free. So you don't have to worry about the cost of tuition, high tuition. So yeah.
Yeah, because I was thinking, something like the Art Institute, there's also this hierarchy of genres where if people don't take cartooning as art, when really it is, and it's a really important form of art. So I think you're doing a lot of really important work here.
And speak to your point about graphic novels, you're now, with March, and there's also a graphic novel on Dr. King. I just recently, a colleague of mine here at BCU just did a graphic novel on the day the Klan came into town in a small town in Pennsylvania. So you're able to use the graphic novel to tell historical stories. And it's not just simply, about the superhero anymore. So I definitely encourage those that feel like maybe they're not a superhero person, but they're into the history, connecting in that outlet to, to tell these stories. Another one I have to make mention is Nat Turner. There's also a Nat Turner graphic novel. So these are ways to get people to learn this history through these images, as my students tell me, these are long books. Can you give me something that I can, and I'm like, well, you still need these books, but let me give you this as an alternative, as an addition, to that.
Thank you. Grace, I have a quick question. I wondered, especially with Jackie Orns and Vera Hendrix that you mentioned so early on, that the work that they were doing, did you come across anything like of them operating under like a pseudonym or anything like that in order to get work at first, or, in such a stressful racial and inequitable time?
So as far as like I said, the Black women, they were very unapologetic. They were like, you're gonna know me. This is who I am, and presented work. So much so that Jackie Orms had a 287-page FBI dossier on her. So yeah, she was very like, I'm gonna tell you how it is. I'm gonna critique the US and give you all the good, bad, and indifferent. I did notice, so there was one artist, George Harriman, who did the Crazy Cat comic, who did go by a pseudonym. And so there was several people who did use the pseudonym to get work because of fear of, like, if they find out that I'm an African-American, maybe they won't publish my work. But as it relates to the Black women, it was very much like, you're going to see, I don't need to hide behind a name. I'm going to present my work, even if it was under the independent, realm.
Sure.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So first of all, I'd like to begin by congratulating Grace and Jakobi for just two fantastic presentations. I love this kind of work. I love scholarship that engages scholars and communities. And I took a group of students to New York maybe 3 years ago, and we saw a Black comic exhibit at the Schomburg, and it was just fascinating to see all of that, work. So I hope you continue with this work, because I think it's just a new area that certainly would be refreshing as an intervention in Africana/Black studies. My question is for, of course, Professor Williams. I really am taken always by that image of seeing a Black Panther standing next to a, let's see, the young patriots. But what I really want to understand are two things. One is, in your work, do the people in the neighborhoods, in the communities, understand that they themselves are sites of information? Do they see themselves as sites of information, that as individuals who can disseminate information, but also help to create narratives that indicate what the experiences of individuals have been in their community? So that's the first question. Do they see themselves as sites of information? And the second one is, what do you think are some of the things that you have to be cognizant of when you're working within a community in order to do the research that you're interested in, while at the same time trying to give the community a voice and helping to create meaning of their own experiences, so that the meaning comes from them as the subject versus you as a scholar?
I think I could answer both questions with the same answer, maybe. So speaking generally as a community, it's unclear how the community themselves respond to your question in that regard. But the activists who have community support tend to speak on behalf of the community. And so, for example, if I bring in Lincoln Park again, which I've always saw as someone who grew up there, as this place that didn't want us, with all these various affluent and wealthy white folks, many of which were racist from my experiences there. And to see the evolution and change of that community, which was predominantly Puerto Rican and Latino, and even some Black folks, and the nexus of activism that's taking place around the ways in which housing and segregation are being, as a policy measure, dictated to them by the state, in this case, the mayor's office. And so in terms of how they respond, they all have these papers that I was just not privy to. So I mentioned the Seed, I mentioned Second City. There are also, I was only looking at the Young Lords, the Black Panther stuff. No, all these associations have papers, all these various groups like Latin American Defense Organization, which was a conglomerate of these Latino organizations that included gangs. Everybody got these papers and these flyers. So they're speaking on behalf of themselves. And what I'm trying to dictate is that scholars haven't used these sources in the ways in which they should have been used. We tend to preface the traditional sources, but here we have underground alternative press, and some of them do have price tags on them because the community purchases them, and they depend upon seeing their representation of voices in those particular files, for example. And then you have all the meetings and activist work and the protests that come out that's usually documented in these sources too. And so when I say this, if I'm looking at Lincoln Park, for example, as an example, these sources are coming from housewives, they're coming from Lincoln Park Community Association, they're coming from the Catholic Church, they're coming from Lotto, they're coming from Young Lords, they come from the LPCC. You got all these numerous groups at play. Then you have the daily weeklies. You have the student newspapers from what's taking place in the high schools and how folks are responding in those ways. So there's a whole nexus of folks who are trying to dictate the terms on their own behalf. But there's a lot of commonality there. And that's what I didn't expect. I expect to see a lot of strife, but there's actually a lot of commonality. Especially coming from some of those affluent associations, like, and there's still some internal discord in something like the Lincoln Park Community Association, LPCA, for example. There's still some internal strife taking place there, but the ways in which support comes from students, like, for example, one quick example will be the ways in which the Young Lords take over the Catholic seminary, theological seminary there. And most of that's instituted by white affluent students at DePaul who are seminary students themselves, who invite them into those spaces and work in coalition with them. So you got these, what I would call strange bedfellows, much like that picture with the Confederate flag and the Panther themselves, and you wouldn't expect these people to work together. Well, Lincoln Park is a hodgepodge of that, of all these groups you would think work together and still having these kinds of organizations taking place and organizing taking place and advocating on behalf of their own and speaking on behalf of their own. So these papers are rich in that regard because they won't appear in places where we would read them. So if you're not in those communities, in those spaces, you won't be privy to those accounts, and which is why I find them as golden nuggets, and also why I didn't share a lot with y'all, because I'm trying to publish it myself before y'all beat me to it, as we're quite honest about it, because no one's used it. So there's a number of books that's come out recently that looks at these areas. On the Young Lords, for example, Johanna Fernandez, for example, has won numerous prizes on her work on the Young Lords. She ain't looking none the way, and she ain't looking under the stuff in here. And not to start naming all these scholars, but there's a whole host of folks who are doing great work in these subjects and these people, but they don't use these files, which is why I give the archivists and librarians so much credit, because I wouldn't have looked for them either. And so I owe much of what I think is a very vast, rich collection to them for introducing it to me. And most of the stuff is available and organized because they, as a library, have used them over the years as teaching resources and tools for the community and also the students on campus. And so you have that other strange bedfellows between the community, town and gown taking place, even how the archive is used. And so I just find it to be as a remarkable space for me as someone that's not trying to do this Puerto Rican history, but you can't help but immerse yourself in that subject.
Wonderful. This has been so rich for all of us in attendance. And I know that we are 8 minutes over at this point. I do want to ask if anybody else has been sitting on the edge of their seat with another question. even though we're still 16 people strong.
Well, I have a question for Grace if I can ask one.
Oh, sure.
But I want to know
Absolutely.
what's in those FBI records and why she's been targeted. I'm assuming they see her a threat, and I want to know why and what's in there and what's happening.
So
It's a lot of documents.
of what I know without, before getting into the documents of kind of, service level stuff, she was calling out government, through her comic strip. She
Okay.
was calling out, state folks. And so, but she was doing it under guise of through this Black woman, talking about fashion, talking about, Eurocentric standards and womanhood. But, laced under that, she was, offering commentary. And her husband were very much activists within the Chicago community. So she, not only was she talking about what's going on through her strip, but through her active work engagement. So it was kind of like, oh, okay, well, you're doing too much. Not only are you, writing this comic strip, but you're in the community too, because she had money. So when you got money, you can say a lot, you can do a lot, you can move things a lot. And so, yeah, and especially when you start specifically, naming names and engaging folks. I don't have those names. That's why I need to get into the papers to see, who she's naming. But when you start being very bold about who you're calling out, yeah, I see how a 287 page dossier can come to mind. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you also.
Allison,
Morgan, go right ahead.
just want to again thank the presenters and thank the BMRC for the support of the fellows. It's a lovely program, and we've been fortunate to host a few folks over the years. I was wondering if Brandon might be able to speak a little bit about his experience. Because we were able to hear from Dr. Jakobi Williams and Dr. Grace Gipson, but I understand Brandon was connected to Dr. Williams' work, and it might be nice to hear a little bit from Brandon, not to put you on the spot, but just a few remarks of how this experience shaped your understanding of the historical research process and the repositories here in Chicago.
And I think I understand that Brandon is in the PhD program at Indiana University, correct?
Right.
Yes. Okay. Welcome.
Yeah, and thank you. And the experience of working with Dr. Williams was extraordinary because there's so much archival history in Chicago in so many places, and there's so many things just in little things that you would normally just overlook, that it's just amazing, like repository. Like there are things in the Chicago History Museum and in the Vivian Harsh collection. I was like, I never knew this existed, but here it is. So like this makes a lot of research a lot easier, knowing that it's all encapsulated in one central location. And Beth at Vivian Harsh collection was very helpful. They had all the archivists in Chicago. You all guys are great. So I hope you all get raises.
No, that's not how it works. But that's lovely. Thank you so much, Brandon. Very kind words. Just really glad to hear your perspective. Thank you. That's lovely.
Special shout out to archivists and librarians. Huh? We love that. Anyone else with other questions? I have to say, I've been sitting on this one, but Dr. Williams, I think a lot of people don't really realize that Fred Hampton started his organizing work with NAACP and made the transition. And I didn't know, I don't know exactly how that came about. If there was any sort of special information or meeting information or anything like that you came across about that transition that he made, and just wondering, and if others in the Rainbow Coalition had come from NAACP or some of those more mainstream organizations. I just wonder.
Okay, so yes, so Fred Hampton was, most people don't know this, he is not a what we call a poor working class kid. He's actually an upper middle class kid from the western suburbs of Maywood. And both of his parents were forming it, what now today is the Corn Products Company that moved around from Argo to Blue Island and Maywood. So they've always been homeowners and forming. That tells you a lot about that company when not only are black people forming, but a black woman is also forming too. And so with that, he was always one of the minorities in his predominantly white suburb. And so he was organizing on behalf of those racial issues in Maywood. And he was recruited by the NAACP for their youth branch, but he was such a good organizer, he eventually became president of the NAACP Youth Council. And because of those oratory skills and his successes of organizing in Maywood against state senators, against policies, he was able to get over almost 19 Black teachers hired, and some of the other activist work that he was recruited later by the Black Panther Party, the Illinois chapter of the party, to join. So he was not seeking to join, he was recruited because of his organizing skills and his oratory skills. Now, all those members who end up founded Illinois chapter of the party, they were also, most of these people are college students. I want to emphasize that. Yeah. They're not the lumpen proletariat like Oakland. They're not on the underground. They're college students. And so was Fred Hampton. At the time, he was studying law at Triton College. I forget what town that is, and next to Maywood on the west side. But Bobby Rush, Bob Lee, and some others who were members of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinated Committee, had helped found the Illinois chapter of the party, and they were recruiting new members. And so Fred Hampton was one of their first recruits. They had to have them. And so you got people coming from SNCC, people coming from NAACP. If I look at groups like Rise Up Angry, right? So those folks are coming from JOIN, Jobs or Income Now. It's an acronym of an offshoot of Students for Democratic Society. So you have all these folks coming from an student organizing tradition, and they were all college students. Forming different community neighborhood organizations that eventually become this Rainbow Coalition. The only group that joined the coalition didn't have those roots are the Young Lords. They began as a gang fighting against many of the other white gangs in the community. Most gangs in Chicago formed out of, particularly Black and Brown, formed out of defending themselves from changing demographic neighborhoods. They were integrating and against white vigilante attacks, particularly in schools. And then their gangs evolved into, don't get me started on gang culture. I leave that for Toussaint and other fellows who study that more deeply. But I got a bit of a background in that. So most of that's what's taking place then. But the Young Lords evolved out of a gang culture, but they very much connected to their community, the Catholic Church, and others in Lincoln Park, which will give them a lot more of, I will argue, a foothold in politics that even the Panthers themselves didn't have in their communities. And so it was interesting to see how that played out in Lincoln Park in one of those segregated, gentrifying communities, and the ways in which folks had all these numerous coalitions and political aspirations. And so you have the student movement very much involved in this period. And as a result, the student movement stayed alive. So it's not the Chicago chapter of the party. It is the Illinois chapter of the party. It was the only state chapter at the time when it was founded, because the party had branches on every college campus throughout the state of Illinois. They had 19 locations. The only one that wasn't a campus location was Cairo and East St. Louis. So every college campus had a chapter of the Black Panther Party, which was tied to their Black Student Union, which was tied to their fight for the creation of a Black Studies program. So whoever was president of Black Studies or Black Studies Union was most likely also the president or the head of the local Black Panther Party. And they was also advocating on behalf of Black Studies. So there was very much a student movement, and a state chapter. Chicago was his headquarters. So Mark Clark, when he's killed, he's coming from a different chapter, which is associated in a college town. And so you have all of, from Peoria, Illinois. So you have all those student connections, and student activism is very important. It's very much a student-driven movement, which is quite different from what we understand the Panthers to be. So if you only look at Oakland, you'll come away thinking that there's the lumpen proletariat, the street element who becomes political, and there's no women. But if you look at Chicago, that's not the case. These are mostly students and organizers, veterans, and majority of the founders and leadership are women. So it's quite different. And that's why the coalition is so important, because these folks already had organizing traditions and participation.
Thank you so much. That's really very helpful to all of our understanding. We're going to conclude. We have gone over by a good 18 minutes, but this has been wonderful. Thank you to both Dr. Grace Gipson and Dr. Jakobi Williams. Excellent sharing of your research. We all, I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say we all look forward to hearing more and to publications as well. So
Thank you.
Thank you. I did put the link in the chat for the presentation series, because we have more fellows that will share their research on upcoming dates. The next one is September 29th, and then after that, October 13th. So please support our BMRC fellows. This was great. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do we all sign off now? Oh, there it is. Get that link.
Allison, you're muted.
Oh, yep. I was just thanking you once again, and I put the, I was just kind of messing around a little bit with the chat. I'll save the chat and I'm going to sign off. Thanks again.
All righty.